we've had a buyer seller meeting and we're, going to make an offer. Let's talk a little bit about, some of the alphabet soup and LOI and APA, what people should be including and not including, getting into DD, due diligence, what buyers have rights to a lot of things, but not everything, and not everything when they want it. I always like to tell buyers, you need to earn the right to see more information. We're not giving you can give me a 17-page due diligence list, but I'm not giving you the employee data until we have your commitment letter and further on. So let's just sort of talk about making the offer and getting through due diligence and then ultimately getting to closing.
Sure. So, okay, number one, I think that pre-LOI, letter of intent, your offer, okay? And some people use an IOI and all this other stuff. Let's just use LOI, okay?
Yep.
Most common. So pre-LOI, what I want buyers to do and what I recommend they all do is basically ask any question you need to get to a go or no-go decision, okay? And understand that you're not in diligence, okay? This is, how am I trying to explain it? Like you're at the point where you need to assume everything being communicated to you is true, okay? And one of the things that, Adam, you and I get a lot is the buyer that never makes an offer is the one that keeps asking for a bunch of spreadsheets on a whole bunch of detail around stuff, okay? It's like, look, if you're drilling down into this detail, like, where are you on the decision? And it's like, oh, I need to know how many times Walker goes pee between 8 and 5 p.m. It's like, what are you talking about? Like, it has nothing to do with the business or whether you want it or not. Like, it's just like so unimportant. And so the thing is like, you need to ask whatever it is you need to make a go or no go decision, make it as shallow as possible and make your offer. Okay. Now, what should that offer be? Okay. There's price, there's terms, there's all this stuff. All I'm going to say on that on this call is, listen, a lot of times buyers will come to me and say, hey, Walker, what do you think I should offer on this business? And I'll say, well, is there an asking price? And they'll say, yeah, it says 1.5 million right here. And I'll say, well, they're telling you what they want. How do you feel about 1.5 million? Okay. And a lot of times when you look at it, if it's a 3.2 times seller's discretionary earnings, or it's a 3.7 times seller's discretionary earnings, I just want all the buyers to understand you're arguing over 6 months of earnings. Okay. It's important, and you need to address the risks that you're taking on in the structure of the deal. Okay. But I think that you really don't want to get in your own way. And a lot of times I will just offer full price because I want the asset. I like the asset. It's worth it. And I typically don't spend a whole lot of time haggling over this or that. I mean, if it's 0.1 times SDE, who cares? Okay. Pay it and move on. It's going to be a 10-year loan. Okay. It's spread over 10 years. Like, so, it's usually not the purchase price. Usually not. Now it can be. So then once you make your LOI, you want me to go through the things that are in it?
Sure, absolutely.
It's basically like what's the purchase price you're offering? What are the terms of the deal? Meaning, is it cash at close? Is it some kind of deferred structure? Contingencies to closing, the closing date. And by the way, most sellers don't know this, but the closing date on the LOI is never accurate. Okay. But what it communicates to Adam and I is, what's the intention of the buyer here? Like, is this like a 90-day? Are they asking for like 4 months? Are they like, I'm going to close in 45 days as long as the bank will help me get that done? It tells us where you are, right?
It's a roadmap.
Yeah, it's a roadmap. Yeah. And then the last thing that's coming to mind is the exclusivity period, right? And so the only thing that's binding in a letter of intent is the exclusivity period. And what that means is that the seller is basically getting engaged to you to get married, and they can no longer go on dates with anyone else. And what that does to you as the buyer is say, great, we now have this offer. It's more than a verbal, it's in writing. I want what you have, and I'm going to pay this many dollars on these terms. Okay. Now with my exclusivity, you've now given me permission to go spend money and time on diligence. And that could be just me. It could be a diligence firm. It could be an accountant. It could be whatever you decide needs to be a part. Lawyers, obviously. I'll pause there. Anything you want to add about the LOI?
No. I mean, I think this is great. I think, some people get they want to do their due diligence pre-LOI, and,
Yeah.
it doesn't work.
Here's how I think about diligence. Okay. Now, I mean, please, like, I want this to be constructive. I'm one guy making it up, but like, the thing is like, I view diligence as like this. It's basically, there's three things that need to happen: financial due diligence, legal due diligence, and operational due diligence. Okay.
Right.
And the thing is that everybody wants the buyer, you too, as the buyer, and you don't realize it. Okay. What you want to do is financial due diligence first. Okay. Because if you spend 60 plus days under contract with a seller, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh geez, I'm just looking at the P&L and like, I don't agree with any of this stuff. You've literally just wasted everybody's time, and including like forcing the seller to take their eye off the ball and potentially injuring their ability to move forward with the sale of their business. Okay. It's a big deal. Don't do that. Respect who you are in work on your team. You got to respect your team and who you're working with here. So do your financial due diligence. Depending on the type of business it is, you got to knock it out in like 1 to 4 weeks. Okay. Number two, legal due diligence. Most attorneys, what is legal due diligence? It's basically, yes, it is looking at contracts. Okay. But it's basically like, is this a real entity? Have they ever been sued? Like, let me look at the operating agreement. It's just like those sort of things. Are they being sued right now? Right? Like, who are these people? Some people might include a background check on a seller, right? But the thing is like, legal due diligence, in my experience, my attorney can do that in like 5 days. Like, it just happens in the background. You get financial diligence done. And as you start moving to more and more competence, okay, if I could magically drop an asset purchase agreement right on the day where everyone's giving a thumbs up on financial due diligence, you've got financial due diligence done, you've got legal due diligence done. Here comes the asset purchase agreement that, in my opinion, the buyer is submitting to the seller. It can go both ways, but it's the buyer's offer. And not only that, but if the seller makes it, if the seller's attorney makes it and sends it to the buyer's attorney is going to put in all the reps and warranties and all the indemnifications that the seller's attorney is not going to put in. And so just on the first lap, it looks like a bloodbath. Okay. So it's just better if the buyer submits the asset purchase agreement. And this is assuming an asset sale. If you're doing a stock sale, it'd be an SPA, stock purchase agreement, but whatever. And that of course is going to be the legal binding document that will ultimately execute the deal while the APA is being negotiated back and forth with the attorneys. And I say negotiated only because I've never seen an attorney say, looks good, looks good, great, no comment. Yeah, no comments, just close, right? I've never seen that. There's always negotiating. But the thing is, and by the way, when the APA is coming in and the financial due diligence is completed, I want the buyer to say like, everything that was represented was true. I'm good to go. Or everything that was represented was not true, and we need to look at this together, okay? Because this is wrong, and we need to make adjustments, okay? That's the time to be making adjustments, not at the end, okay? Because oh man, you're gonna piss everyone off. But I mean, some buyers, they want to be Donald Trump style negotiators or whatever. Fine, okay, but you're wasting a lot of time. So then while the APA is going, that's when you get into operational due diligence, okay? Everyone's comfortable with you, right? Maybe the buyer and seller and the broker have been talking weekly. Okay, financial diligence is done, legal diligence is done. Usually the SBA has approved the loan, right? Like a lot of those things. Now it's time to get into like, okay, hey, Adam, how is this sausage made exactly? Okay, right. It's like, good. So now you start to get into, all right, maybe some other components of it. But to your point, during operational diligence, it's not until the very end where the real most sensitive stuff, is sort of allowed, right? So can I give you an example?
Sure.
I bought a company with what, I always use Porter's 5 forces to evaluate. And people like MBA graduates are like, you don't actually use Porter's 5 forces. I'm like, no, I do. I use it all the time, right? And this business had a very strong supplier power. Okay. In other words, there was one place to get the product. And if that relationship didn't transfer, or at some later date, they didn't work with me, that's an issue. I bought another company with customer concentration. And I'm talking like 25% of the business was a customer. Okay. In the supplier power situation, I had a call with the supplier after the APA was all verbally agreed to, and we were closing the next day. And all it was like, hey, nice to meet you. Go back to I'm meeting the seller. I'm Walker. Here's what I bring to the table. I'm really excited about doing this, like blah, blah, blah. And I just need to know, is this partnership solid? Right. And I'll even, I think I even said something like, I'm making the largest financial investment of my entire life. And like, if this doesn't work out, like it's detrimental. So like, I just sort of need to know, right, that like, we're good. And because I think that this company is bringing tremendous value to you, don't you? Right.
Right.
Yes, it was a great call. We closed, that was 7 years ago. Talked to the guy again yesterday. Like we continue to thrive. Yeah. On the one with the customer power, I didn't talk to the customer before closing. Why? Because it's a customer. If you talk to a customer before closing and then you don't close, it's an asymmetrical risk that no seller can take on. You will destroy the company and everything that the seller has built. Okay. In either case, I met that customer that it wasn't the day after closing, but we called them the day after closing and said, this happened. Let's set up a meeting, right? First thing I do is always call customers. So a supplier, day before closing, customer, day after closing, right? Most sensitive kind of stuff, okay? Right. Usually I don't meet any employees until after closing. Is that true? Yeah. I've never met an employee pre-closing. Is that true? Look, I've participated.
We rarely allow it. It's got to be a really compelling reason. Let me sort of take a step back here. So we've sort of tactically talked about, starting versus buying. We've talked about doing the research, talking with brokers. We've talked about getting pre-qualified. We've talked about analysis, searching for businesses. We've talked about writing a letter of intent. We've talked about, APA and due diligence and all these things to get it closed. And these are all routine process driven things. I want to sort of introduce something here that many buyers and sellers, quite frankly, aren't prepared for, which is, these don't always work. There's ups and downs. These deals die 3 times. There's an emotional stress that goes on that if you think the first business or 2 you're going to look at, you're going to buy, yes, does it happen 1 out of 100 times? Yes. But this is a real emotional journey. And so, last month on our webinar, we had a psychologist on just to talk about it. I got so much positive feedback from buyers and sellers and advisors because no one talks about this. Let's just take a minute here because you see it, Walker, on your deals, both ones you've done and ones that you broker. We see it as well. It's a journey emotionally.
Oh yeah. The biggest thing I would say to that is, this is the headline, okay? The deal's never done until it's done, and do not ever, ever, ever put any real weight on the closing date. When I see people, talking with, swimming pool installers, 3 weeks before closing, it's like, no. No, don't go there in your head, okay?
How do you explain that, Walker? Let me focus on it. How do you explain that to a buyer? And we're talking to many buyers right now who says, well, I have to talk to the employees or I have to meet the customers. And you and I know that's just not how it's done. That's too much of the goodwill and the risk for the seller. How do you have that conversation with the buyer? Say, there's a time and a place, and this is not the time nor the place.
Yeah, well, I start with usually how I outline diligence as I just did, right? And then I simply talk about, imagine if it's your business, okay? Like the damage that can be done is you can't fix it. The damage that can be done, you can't fix. And the thing is what I want you to do is look at this thing that you're buying, right? And again, revenue, infrastructure, earnings, been running for a number of years. Here's all the stuff. Okay. Then you should also be comfortable because you've got, reps and warranties and indemnifications in the asset purchase agreement. So if that seller is lying to you, like that's like you can take legal action, right? I mean, it's not, there's nothing light to be taken lightly here, right? And one of the things that I do always ask is like, have you made any promises to any employees about raises or bonuses or anything like that? Right. Because every single business I've ever bought, within the first 4 weeks, everyone asked me for a raise, or they told me the seller promised me this bonus, or like it always happens, right? And I look them right in the face and I'm like, I very specifically asked, Anne this question before she sold me the company, and like, because it's very important to me, and so whatever, and so I always diffuse it that way. Bit of a tangent,
but it's an emotional journey. I mean,
I don't even know what else to add to that other than
my whole point is I bring it up because I think people need to be aware. Like, this isn't like I have my buy then build book here. Okay, you can read what's in here, but you have to be prepared for what's going to go on up here, because it's unique.
Yeah, and I think
more so for the seller too.
The amount of risk that you're taking on when you buy, I mean, like the first few businesses that I bought, the first like probably 2 or 3 I bought, like I just wanted to throw up on closing day. It was like, oh my God. Like it was like, and a lot of times people, they think they're going to buy a business and they're like, oh man, this thing is like kicking off $1 million. First thing I'm going to do is increase my salary to owner status. And it's like, no, build cash, build safety, understand what the heck is going on. Like, I want you to really approach it as a bootstrap kind of situation. Okay. Yeah. And and I think Adam, I guess it goes all the way back to my sort of prep funnel and just the attitude, aptitude, and action first thing, because that's the thing that's going to get you across the finish line. I feel like, buyers get really emotional, like right towards the end, but, and they start to, my colleague Jason came up with this thing called the 11th hour freakout is what he calls it. And it's basically like a buyer calls like 2 days before closing and they just say something, right? And like, whatever it is. And like, you have to look at it. And this is maybe one of the hardest parts of being a broker is you have to, like, I always, when I get the call, I'm like, I'm expecting it. I'm like, here it comes. And I'm like, what's up? And I listen to them very closely. And I'm like, all right, hold on, let me think about this. And I just take a breath and I think to myself, are they telling me something that is actually like a problem with the business? Or are they just kind of freaking out because they're about to buy a company? And I'm telling you, 9 out of 10 times it's this one, right? And as the broker, you're sort of the rational person that's able to see the whole deal, okay? Yeah. And hopefully by that time you've built a partnership with the buyer, because here's how I think about it, Adam, is that when we're talking to a seller before we go to market, we represent the market. When we go to market with the business, we represent the seller. Once the buyer and seller, are trying to get to a common goal, okay? At the end of the day, you and I don't care like how the economics shift. Like yes, we have a fiduciary responsibility to the seller, okay? But the thing is like, we're a team, man. And like, we just, you guys want to do this thing, I'm on board, I'm going to coordinate it. And the truth, Adam, I've never once closed a deal without a broker involved, ever. And it's because the seller or the buyer, through negotiations, they got to step away from the table. There's no one to coordinate. There's a bunch of lawyers involved. Look, I love lawyers, not really, but you know what I'm saying? Like, they don't always play nice. And then when you get to the end and the buyer's freaking out or whatever, the seller just is exploding. So it's like, I can't control you, right? And it's like so many sellers, like once you get in this seat, you're just gonna know, like you just understand. Like there's just a flow of the business. And you're asking me all these spreadsheet questions, and it's like, I don't know, I've been doing this 20 years. I do that in 5 minutes, and I look at my cash balance, and I know exactly. I can look at my cash balance in my bank, and I know exactly how much inventory I have. Right. I mean, like you're not, like I don't have a spreadsheet. I already know. And like, how do you extract that, right? I'm sorry. That was a bit of a ramble, but
No, hey, well, I want to keep it moving here. Before we quote close the deal, we had a question that come up, and basically I'm going to paraphrase it, but if you're having some initial conversations and you know there's potential skeletons in the closet, do
yeah.
you just agree to that price and not argue over the 0.1 of SDE and take care and go in and find it due diligence and try to renegotiate it, or do you sort of, how do you handle when you know there's potential issues and there's potentially something that you may have to adjust?
I understand the question, and the answer is play the broker. Okay. In other words, if you're asking very specific questions and they're like throwing smoke screens or whatever, wanting to know if you're going to make an LOI, guess what? Fine. They're giving you permission to have due diligence not be what you represented is true or not. Now you're getting into, hey, I've got new information. They're giving you permission to renegotiate post LOI. That's my opinion. Okay. And the thing is like, you could, it's a tough one because again, it comes back to the way you play it is you ask the questions. If they're throwing smoke screens, wanting to know if you're going to party, go in with where you're comfortable at. Okay. Don't just overprice with the purpose of going in to renegotiate. But sometimes that's what you need to do. Speaking on two sides of my mouth because of the broker. Now, what I want you to do is because pre-LOI, you're trying to get to go or no go decision right at the beginning. What I want you to do is once you get under LOI because they've accepted your offer, now get to go or no go. Okay. Right away. Do it for yourself. Okay. And do it for everybody else involved because you as the buyer can break an LOI at any time. Okay. And I would go straight at those skeletons and
I would answer it a little differently. We typically tell our buyers we're not going to retrade after we accept an LOI unless you find something material.
But if it's new information, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, if it's material.
That's material.
That's a good one. Yeah.
They just can't wake up on Thursday and say, instead of 1.5,
I feel like whatever. And I think that's true. And the only thing I'd add to that is I would say like, because of what you said, Adam, I mean, it's hard without knowing the specifics around the deal. I always say structure the deal to address the risks you're taking on as a buyer. Okay. Now, don't hear this and run out in left field. If you're looking at something that's like a 3 times, okay, and it's like $1 million or $2 million, that's a cash at closing deal, folks. Okay, like you're taking it or you're not. This isn't like, oh, I want like an earn out and like a seller note and a holdback and by the way, on seller notes, okay, what are you really getting? Okay, everyone's like, oh man, I'm going to do this whole seller note. I'm like, why not just get it from the bank? The bank will literally give it to you, right? And you can usually get a much lower price, by the way, if you show up and you're like, I'm cash at close. I got it all from the bank. And by the way, I don't really want to see you after about 4 weeks, like ever again. Guess what? That's a buyer that most sellers want, right? For some reason, first-time buyers are all married with this seller financing thing. And I think they think it comes with like no personal guarantee. Don't see that. See that. I mean, maybe in an off-market deal, but the thing with this like mythical off-market deal, I shouldn't say mythical because they exist, but they're a bit mystical. It's like that dragon, like the dragon's out there, but like the thing is like, it's usually taking advantage of a situation and lack of information. Yes. So if you can find a widow or a widower whose spouse was running the business who died like yesterday, and they're like, what? And like they did no planning of any kind, and all of a sudden you've got someone totally incompetent who ended up with a business, and you can go in there and like work the thing, like, and you're the warm stove there as the buyer. That's how those deals get done. But it's what is it, Adam? Like death, drugs, disease, disability, something. Divorce. Thank you. Yeah. So those are the things. So I don't want to say like you're a catfish bottom feeding. The lawyer called him, an estate lawyer, and he said, "Hey, Brian, I think you'd be really good at this business." He said, "Well, what is it?" It was this e-com business that it wasn't totally e-com. It's a real physical facility, but they sell everything e-commerce. And the seller, no kidding, was found dead in his red Porsche 911 with $1 million in cash in the trunk and a gun, a weapon, and he died and he had cocaine on his lap. You might get the call, but guess
Right.
what? This guy had already started 2 or 3 businesses and was known in the space. And so once you get the flywheel going, that's how those deals come to you, people. That's how I got probably at least 2 of the 3 of the 7 companies I bought. Was the broker called me directly and said, I got this deal. Before I go to market, do you want it?
Yeah.
I bought all 3. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Well, let's presume in our mythical journey here that we've sold the business has officially sold.